Welcome to the Infernal Brotherhood's Willow series. Today I'm continuing my live reading of Shadow Moon by Chris Claremont and George Lucas, Book 1 of the Chronicles of the Shadow War trilogy. If you enjoy this series, please like, share, and subscribe for more Willow content. You can also support us by becoming a patron on Patreon or a member here on YouTube. It really helps the channel grow. You can even help us out by signing up to Audible by using the link in the description below. They cleared a step or two, or three, away from the wall and him, but he wasn't fooled. This exchange was as much a part of the interrogation as anything that came before. The slightest overt reaction, and they'd be on him like death dogs. He could only act when and if they decided to turn words into deeds, and trust he'd have the strength and skill to stop them. Anakari shook her head. Back and shoulders were ever so slightly bowed with an equivalent heaviness to her carriage that betoketh a hard-fought struggle. She put her all into the duel with Thorn, and it had cost her as much as any purely physical fight. "It's too close to the ascension. I want no blood spilled." "Who's to know, Carrie? Who's to even notice?" Modry now, seemingly taken the sergeant major's part. But Thorn sensed something in voice and manner that told him different, that this was for show. He tried to focus his wits, to probe more deeply, but he still resonated too strongly with Anakari and found his concerns blunted by her deep affection for the man. It was a brutal paradox. She knew he was dangerous, yet cared for him nonetheless. "You ask such a thing, with the forces and personages loose within these walls? That's your only reason?" Thorn caught a glimpse of a smile from her, a wan little thing, surprisingly at odds with the tenor of the moment. She wrapped her arms around her body and held herself close as though chilled to the bone. "No," she mused, thinking mostly aloud, "he isn't much to look at, yet the Magus wants him." "How fortunate for him the captain came to us then, eh? Should I be flattered that you trust me, since it was I and my Thunder Riders who brought the Magus to court? Or is this a case of holding friends close, but enemies closer?" She hardly heard the man's words. Another thought entirely was on her mind, as she turned her gaze toward Thorn. For a moment, Nelwyn and Daikini's eyes met, and Thorn blinked as insight cast another visage across hers, a residue from the bonding. Male to female, distaff sides of the same coin, so disconcertingly alike they might be one, separated by the span of a decade. The boy's hair was close-cropped, covering his head like a wild hedgerow, and both had the same ready, incandescent grin. She'd just lost hers since. As she did now with a slight shudder, and he knew she'd seen that same haunting face reflected in his own eyes. He had to be more careful. There were still too many ties binding them. No matter how hard he worked to purge them, some would always remain. She'd wrapped herself in his soul, even though he'd kept a fair chunk of it hidden. Twinned themselves in spirit, as she and her long-lost brother had been twins in flesh. "An old rivalry, perhaps?" he heard the Castellan say. "A feud we know nothing about." "Perhaps," Anakari conceded distractedly, as she struggled to recover her composure. The depth of the resonance had shaken her, as it had Thorn. Yet she said nothing of it to Modry. "I want to be sure if I act." "As your highness commands." "Too many questions, Modry. If the Magus is so powerful, what is his concern with this Nelwyn?" "Ask." "I saw no need before now."
"Would you rather learn the hard way?"
"Leave the Nelwyn as he is, Modry, till after the ceremony."
"That, highness, would not be prudent."
The warlord stepped forward, one long stride taking him right to Thorn, fast as a striking cobra. Too late. Thorn saw him draw a handful of black crystalline sand from a pouch of his own, watched it coalesce before his eyes into a slim stiletto blade of gleaming obsidian. He held lightly between both palms. Then, with the faintest outrush of breath, he puffed it forward into his skull, stabbing right through the point where Anakari had drawn forth his third eye. Thorn convulsed, like a man dancing with lightning, lips curling back so far from his teeth he thought the flesh would tear free. Thankful, in the rapidly dissolving spaces within him still capable of conscious thought, for being chained. He might dislocate every joint with his madcap twists and turns, but otherwise he'd have surely broken himself into bits. He was gabbling nonsense noises like a death dog, and in that awful moment knew he'd been taken by the enchantment that had been used on Farron. Then Anacary shoved the taller man aside with a force and fury that surprised as much as amused him, though all good humor faded in an instant when Jalabi put his body between them.
"Damn you, Mowdrey! I gave you no such leave. A good commander knows when to take an initiative, my pet."
She bridled at the intentional diminutive that was plain on her face, but Castell and Mowdrey couldn't see the response. Not only was his view blocked by her escort, she was too close to Thorn, and there was no sense of it in her reply. She would have grabbed hold of the prisoner, but his movements were too violent and unpredictable. Of the stiletto, there was no sign. The blade and all its malefic power had been absorbed into Thorn's flesh on contact.
"He's no use to anyone smashed to a bloody pulp." "Least of all himself, my intent precisely. Forgive me, Carrie. You yourself said the night is too important to take the slightest risk. If anything's amiss, it's surely blocked now."
He paused, allowing her a moment to reply, and when none came,
"Shall we go, Princess? We've indulged ourselves enough for one evening."
There was no outward alteration to voice or manner, yet he made plain precisely who was the power in the room. Thorn shook his mad testament to the fate in store for those who opposed it, and from Mowdrey came the definite hope that Jalabi would be fool enough to try. Still hidden from view, Anacary blew on the fingertips of her right hand, then touched them to Thorn's lips, thereby passing on the ghost kiss. When she took her hand away, a scattering of faint sparkles remained on his lips, a lingering of star stuff. There was blood as well, where a tooth had been broken her skin. As she rose, she pulled on her gauntlet, covering the small wound. Mowdrey ushered her up the stairs, but paused himself after she'd stepped outside for a last soft-spoken word.
"Caught you,"
he said with an appreciative nod at how completely the deadly trap had closed.
"Just as the Magus said. Let my princess crack your shell with niceness and stab you before you can close the breach."
He smiled, flashing gleaming perfect teeth like a shark about to bite.
"Poor Peck. Did you ever dream a change spell could be cast so easily? Magus thinks you'll beat it. Maybe we'll toss the boy Garin in when I come back. For first feast, see if he's right. However it turns out, you'll have scars across you no power can erase. Dead, broken, turned. All the same to me and mine. What matters is you're beaten."
And Thorn was alone. He gave voice then as he had over the ruins of Tirasleen. Majestic walls crumbled all to power, with naught but dead before him and Elora's spirit long gone from the place. Everything in him that hurt he transformed into rage and cast it out his voice. Fire exploded from his breast, lighting him from within as it followed the byways of his nervous system to the ends of his body and shot away with such fury the chains were ripped from their place in the wall. Much of the wall came with them, but his body was in such a state his spasms simply threw the hulking blocks off him. No matter that skin was broken and bones crushed beneath. This would go on, he knew, until he was pulp and stretched to full extension between the realms of life and death. No longer one, not quite the other. It was the same enchantment that had been used on Farron, as too late he realized that Mowdrey had been the leader of the dark figures he'd seen in the boy's memory. But where he was concerned, the change spell manifested itself with significant differences. It would smash his body to rubble, as it would his soul, and rebuild both in the image of a beast. The intellect of a man, the power of a sorcerer, mated to the brute force of a death dog, all tightly leashed to the magus who had cast the spell. To lock the change in place, to curse the spirit as well as the flesh, required a blood sacrifice. Ideally, a friend, the more innocent, the better. He fought as he never had before. He forged a sword from the substance of his soul, and used it with a skill his arms would never have. backed by a wild ferocity that danced along the edge of madness. With each swing, though, his blade shone a fraction less brightly. He took no steps forward, only back, and shadow hemmed him in from every side. He'd seen Anacre as the paramount threat after the bonding. He couldn't help but relate to her as something of a friend. His defenses had been down, and he was being crushed as inexorably and completely as Tyrosleen. The battle would have been over already had not Anacre's farewell kiss canceled much of her remaining enchantment, which held him physically helpless and restored a measure of his own resources. The Magus himself was the most frightening element. Thorn had seen his share of danger. In his travels, he'd honed his magical abilities as any swordsman would his blade, and learned to defend himself against all manner of assaults. Yet, against this spell, his best efforts, his most wily and cunning stratagems, came to naught. The Magus seemed to know him better than he did himself. Every parry he had anticipated, every counter-thrust, was bent harmlessly aside. The harder he fought, the more quickly he raced towards ultimate defeat. "Trust me," he heard, and wished he was deaf. "You're a demon!" he shrieked in his mind, teeth so broken their jagged chunks had savaged tongue and cheek beyond the ability to speak. "You won't die. They won't let you. They've caught you good and proper, and through you, the child. Can't save yourself, Peck. How are you to save her?" "You're a demon!" "Only your hope, now as before." He didn't have long. The spell attacked the mind before the body, and he had a sudden, sickening image of his soul self, hacking away at shadows long after everything it embodied had been consumed. Even if he survived, through some miracle, all that remained of him would be a shell. He spat blood, and worse, but forced himself to say the words aloud. "Help me," he asked. "Please." All light went away. The torches left by Modri, so Thorn could watch what was happening to himself, simply winked out. The floor rose up around him, as though it had turned to tar. And then he was the floor. In that twinkling, his insight expanded beyond its farthest boundaries, sweeping him from one realm of perception that he had always known into another, for which none of that knowledge had the slightest meaning. He was stone, every stone, from the core foundation to the highest roof point. He had no words to describe the experience, no means to catalog the overwhelming number and variety of sensations. It was like standing at the heart of a mirror room, knowing that even the most wayward glance would reveal a near infinite number of reflections, no two quite the same. Human instinct made him want to move, but he found himself anchored in place, the stones bound to each other by mortar, the entire edifice standing atop a plug of solid rock that was like a mountain within the earth, unaffected by the cracks and fissures that laced the surrounding substructure. At one and the same moment, he beheld the dungeon where he lay, the kitchen spaces of the palace proper, and every other room as well, the entirety of Elora's eyrie, the ceremonial hall, specially constructed for the coming sacrament, and, like her china and gowns, to be used this once and never again. Everyone was moving, and he felt as though he was being pounded over every inch of his body. There was constant noise. He could no more discriminate between sounds than between sights. His brain couldn't handle the load. He was drowning in sensation, and as he would in water, except the outcome wasn't death, but madness. Then, absurdly, the concept of drowning led to that of swimming. He was a rare Nelwyn. He liked the water. He wasn't very graceful. He remembered Rule muttering that he had the style of a lame frog, and more than once Bastion and Anel used him for fishing practice. He stopped worrying about all that was around him and simply accepted it. This cacophony was the medium through which he moved. Sanity was a matter of relegating it to the background, where it could be ignored. Perhaps thinking of the brownies was what led him to them, for all of a sudden he was looking at them from a score of different directions and hearing their voices as big as life. "Told you! Told you! Told you!" Frangine had worked himself into a state. They were both still in Elora's tower and had taken refuge in the central tree of the garden there, as far from any stone surface as they could manage.
We never should have come here, and we of a certes never should have let him near this accursed place, especially when we had a clear road to freedom. What do you suggest? Was Rule's weary retort. That we knock him over the head and cart him away on our backs? He's been eaten by a demon, and we're stuck. The brownie had it right and wrong. He wanted to tell Frangine so, but he was aware of no physicality through which concept could be translated into speech. He couldn't even throw the words into their thoughts because the consciousness he shared was wholly abhorrent to them. They would see any contact as an attack and any communication as a trick. He was as much the demon now as he was an eagle when insight allowed him to ride his soul within Els, and the experience was as much a wonder. Then, as though his thought of the eagles had been a cue, "Blessed Maker!" Frangine cried. "We can't even call the eagles for a pickup because of those damned herons!" "Keep yelling as you are, you're guaranteed to bring them back up here, or worse. That is not what I would call an acceptable state of affairs. What do you want from me, Frangine?" Frangine made a very nasty face. "Absolutely nothing!" and humped himself to the far side of the trunk to find a bowl of his own to perch on. The garden made no sense to Thorn. It was rich with growing things and was clearly tended by a loving, hard-working hand. But unlike every other aspect of the tower, it was surprisingly informal. It was a place to run barefoot and loll disreputably in the sun, in a setting where the very concept of play was anathema. He couldn't explain the herons either. Like death dogs, they blighted whatever they touched, yet there was no sense of any such taint to the garden or the tree itself, else the brownies wouldn't have taken refuge there. He yearned to call out to his companions, reassure them that he was all right, but in truth, he wasn't altogether sure that was so. He heard Elora's name, and found a pair of daikini, portly of build, powerful of carriage, dressed for success, striding along a lower gallery. There was no sense of movement. It was as if some particle of him was aware of every simultaneous movement within the confines of the castle, allowing him the ability, through the demon, to switch from one to the other, as though he was exchanging painted illuminations in a viewer. "You worry too much, my friend," the one said. "I'm Minister of State. It's my job," replied the other. "The king knows his business." "So I believed, until those damnable Maisons were invited within the walls." "Their warlord is a prince in his own right, just the man to tame Menacre. As allies, they'd secure our southern frontiers. You can't deny that. And it's only an escort party. I doubt the Red Lions have anything to fear from a few score men, even Thunder Riders." "I shall be so thankful when this is over." "Heard that more than once, I'll grant you. Lots of work, lots of stretch. But I think, the reward, a new balance between the realms." "You think?" "I dream. Ye don't? Can't go the way they are, that's certs now. Been playing lapdog in the Vale folk all my born days, as my father did in his, and his father, and so on back to the dawn of the world. It's our land as much as theirs, damn sinful of 'em not to share." "Keep your voice down. You're not making a Guildhall speech." "I'm trying to make a point." "Why in hell aren't you listening?" "Because I've a demi-score of ambassadors in my face day in, day out, complaining that they share too much, and all we daikini want out of the bargain is more, more, more." "You've seen my plans. With engines of steam, we can haul more goods faster. We'll gladly pay tariffs provided," the merchant said after a hesitation. "They're reasonable." The minister chuckled. "One man's reasonable is another's tyranny. The tracks your trains run across permanently alter the face of the land." "And roads, they don't?" "Not as much, no, and there's trouble there as well. Why else does most heavy traffic go by water?" "Another case. Use my engines attached to paddles to drive boats." "I can't wait till you try persuading the Weir clans to accept that." "They have powers. We have our wits, though only they won't allow us to properly use them. I tell you, the day's coming when that has to change. Why in hell should we suffer for their fear?" "Because their fear could lead to our destruction." "Mayhap that's a risk it's past time we took." "She's only a child, my friend. You demand too much of her." "It's that or drown. What's to lose?"
At the same time, he heard a clutch of ambassadors in another part of the palace have much the same conversation, with the perspectives reversed. They came too much to the same conclusion, and Thorn's heart turned cold as he heard a frantic outcry, shrieked at the top of already overstressed lungs. "I've killed the spavined little bitch!" Elora's dressmaker, clothes in disarray, and the makings of a spectacular bruise plumping one eye where she'd evidently caught him fair with her bare heel. Nobody liked her. Many feared her. All were proud to have her in residence. None wanted the slightest to do with her. That wasn't called for by official duties. He opened his eyes, grateful at last for a purely physical cause and effect. Stone beneath his cheek, but darkness began an arm's stretch from where he lay, which was where he'd fallen. He was sore all over, but when he'd called on limbs to stir, they did so without complaint. The aches were little more than what came after a poor night's sleep. He pushed himself up to see that the wall was still broken and that he lay amidst a scattered jumble of stone blocks. Some were freshly stained, but he decided not to investigate further. His clothes, what remained of them, were as fouled as he began to undress. "Well," he said.
"Bargain offered, bargain kept."
"What have you done?" he asked, trying to discern a being within the darkness.
"Given of myself."
"I didn't know demons did such things."
"Perhaps you don't know so much."
"Very likely. Thank you," he said simply, because that was as much formality as he could muster. "I owe you more than my life." The demon said nothing. "Who are you?" Thorn wondered aloud. "What are you?"
"I am,"
it replied, with an air of puzzlement, as though these were questions it had never put to itself.
"How I came to be, I do not know. I have always been of this place."
"I sense that." Bound to the stones when they were free-standing, and carried with them when quarried and cut to form the first foundation. No memory of who had ensnared it, or why, or how long ago, save that it was of a time when none of the present races walked the world. "I must go," Thorn said, but failed in his initial attempt to rise.
"You cannot."
That denial got his dander up, and himself to his feet, though he had to lean against a block for support. "I'm needed."
"Here more than elsewhere."
"I don't understand. What do you mean?"
"There is a debt. Honor demands a settlement."
"I was wondering when we'd get around to that. If it's freedom you're after, I don't think I can. The bindings that hold you are beyond my power to loose."
"Freedom, yes, but not for me."
The darkness moved, initially revealing Thorn's belt pouches, which he gratefully pulled to him. He fished out a canteen and splashed precious water on his face. Fresh clothes came to hand, a fashion inspired mostly by rule. A shirt of heavy cotton, dyed a green so dark it was almost black, as useful for camouflage in the night as in the deep woods. Trousers of wool, buckskin boots that laced to the knee, designed for hard travel over rough country. Dark sweater, woven so tightly it was virtually waterproof, even without his enchantment to help. Shearling vest, built with big pockets. The sweater and vest he let lie for the moment, warm enough in the shirt alone. He scarfed some food and a flask of water from the other pouch, but when he wanted most was his carryall and especially his sword. He assumed they were lost to him, either in the captain's possession or the princess's, only to discover to his amazement that both lay by his side. "You have been busy," he confessed to the demon as he buckled on his belt and pouches. There was no reply. When he looked up, a woman lay before him. She floated at waist height, with night on every side. Tall and powerfully built, there was nothing gentle or elegant about her. Broad shoulders, long arms and legs, almost no hair to speak of. Black as the darkness surrounding her, cropped close to the skull, like a day's growth on a man's with a heavy beard. Tribal tattoos on biceps and thighs, plus some scars. A nose that had been broken, set between wide-set eyes and high cheekbones that defined a strong, square jaw. She had the upturned eyes and gold-touched skin of one who hailed from the Spice Lands, and the tone of her musculature, plus the calluses on her hands, spoke of a woman who earned her way with a sword. She didn't breathe, but she wasn't dead. He ran a finger along his lower lip. still reflectively as the faint sparkles that glittered against her skin. There was a smudge in the center of her forehead, as he knew there was on his, where the crystal blade had been thrust home. Same fate, same fight. And in her way, she'd won. She'd preserved her soul and her humanity, though it had cost her every other aspect of herself. Who was she?
Meat, as you are meat. Is there a difference?
To such as you, I suppose not.
She fled from those who would enslave her. They searched. They did not find.
You made sure of that, I suppose.
One slave to another.
It surprised him to hear the demon express itself in such terms. He didn't think the creature could be so self-aware. There's an old saying, anyone fool enough to bargain with demons is sure to be cursed as a result.
Bit late for that.
He couldn't help but chuckle. What is it you want?
Freedom for my child.
Demons have children?
We are what we are. It is you who name us, and define us by that name.
I stand corrected, I think.
You know so little.
He had no counter for that, so all he did was nod silent agreement.
To come to be in this place is to be imprisoned as I was. That I will not permit. For your life and freedom, I require the same for my child.
His head shook of its own volition, eyes flashing from the body before him to the heart of the darkness beyond. No, he said, I cannot. I will not. That is an abomination.
Does not one gift balance the other?
She had a life and a being all her own. You have no right to steal it.
Both life and being are gone. Wherein is the harm in using what remains?
How can you possibly comprehend? Even if that were true, there's no way I'd be mad or desperate enough to loose a demon from its prison. Your kind cause horror enough as it is.
Shall I then give voice, then, to what I want? Peck, nowhere in this palace can you hide from me. I'll hound you into the very arms of those who hunt you, and laugh to watch you crack the bones of those you hold most dear.
Then do it and be damned.
Such I am already, wizard. Why else do I require your aid? You fear the worst, Drumheller, but what of hope?
I must be mad to hear a demon speak that word.
I offer you my greatest treasure, to shape and do with as you will. If there is a better way of living than we have ever known, teach it to my child.
I've never heard of one of you talking so. Why should you care? Why should it matter?
To be, that is life. To be aware, that is something more. I had no regard for those of your walking kind about me until that child came.
Your child?
No, the youngling in the tower. Alone she was, and afraid, still more babe than girl, found burned and bruised and smoking in the yard whereon her eyrie was built. She moved, she breathed, but in most ways she was as hollow within as this flesh form here. Only a knackery dared touch her. The others had too much fear. She would speak to none of them. She would speak to me. I was special to her. She called me friend. I knew the word, but not the meaning. At first, I answered when she called because it amused me. She spoke from the heart. She knew of no other way. Better I had not listened. Better I had opened stones beneath her to drop her to the eternal fire. But she spun a spell of words, and brought light where none had ever shone. It was more than I could bear. To my shame and sorrow, I fled from her. But having beheld the light, even if only for that moment, I cannot bear to keep my child in the dark.
I should have come sooner, Thorn breathed, but his inner voice answered without mercy. You didn't know, did you? And you had grief enough of your own to cope with. Past his mind's eyes cascaded a series of images, courtesy of the demon or his own imagination, he neither knew nor cared, of a child whose spirit was as radiant as her flame-blonde hair, whose nature was to reach out to everything and everyone around her, cast in blood and fire across the face of the globe to a land of strangers. None to answer her call, none to take her outstretched hand, no longer a needing, growing girl, but an object of veneration and fear, a talisman, abandoned first by friends of the flesh, and then by one of the spirit. Yet, for all of that, she made a garden. He was certain it was her doing, to the bottom of his bones, of such peace that even night herons couldn't befoul it. And here was a demon, speaking of hopes and dreams, a creature more inclined to eat its young, bargaining to give that offspring a better life. The faintest of gleams on the floor caught his eye. A quick bend and reach brought Anakare's hair clip to his hand. Reflexively, he reached back for his own, though he could feel it was long gone, lost in the mad scramble around Elora's eyrie, or during his own seizure, he didn't know. He lightly rubbed his thumb over his oval face, its designs chased by an earnest hand whose ambition only leaped skill. Again, the twinned visage came to him that had overlaid Anakare's face, a last gift on their shared birthday before the world shattered. The princess loved few things more. So how, he wondered, had it come to be left behind? Instinct again, prompting him to action. He gathered his hair at the base of his skull, more a matter of practicality than high style, and anchored it with Anakare's clip. Perhaps there's hope after all, he whispered.
Your answer, Thorn Drumheller.
If it's within my power, he told the demon, I'll save your child. Chapter 7. To do what was necessary required that Thorn bind himself to the demon, in much the same way that Anakare had bound herself to him. In the process, while his sorceress abilities expanded exponentially, his hold on them became increasingly more tenuous. There was no light to see by in his cell, but that didn't seem to matter. Thorn couldn't see himself, couldn't see the woman he knew lay before him. All was darkness, as absolute as creation must have been before the striking of the first celestial spark. He could hear breathing, his own, with a shiver to each intake and exhalation that had nothing to do with physical discomfort. Magic required an essential harmony of being, and hard as he worked, he couldn't find it. With an effort that left his temples throbbing, he sharpened the focus of his insight, closing every window he could find on the infinitely faceted world the demon took for granted, until the darkness of the cell came alive. On one plane, darkness is simply the absence of light, but as a color black is the sum total of all the rest, the more that are combined, the darker they get. For Thorn, it was as if he was suddenly immersed in a great ocean and able to observe all its myriad elements, currents great and small moving through the deeps like rivers, demarked not simply by force and direction, but temperature, each throwing off swirls and eddies that themselves formed strata in the water the way a vein of minerals might within a mountain. In that room, Thorn saw patterns of energy, all black, but the difference now was that one was black that had once been scarlet, another black that had once been pale rose-edged teal. Memories in the fabric of the chamber's substance of more colors, more frames of being than he had names for. None of it was discernible straight on, of course. Fates forfend, he groused to himself even as he marveled at the sights. Anything should come that simple. Only as flashes at the farthest corner of his vision, like the streaks seen against the inside of his eyelids on a bright and sunlit day after he squeezed them tight shut. He was a considerably more coherent and focused presentation, order against the demon's natural state of chaos, and he allowed himself a silent whistle of admiration at whoever had bound the creature prisoner. There was no stronger stone than this primordial granite. It had been formed in the earliest days of the world, cast up as the heart of the first range of mountains. Time had simply weathered it down to its purest essence. By contrast, there was no more anarchic form of being, he wasn't even sure the term life properly applied, than demons. They abhorred any sense of structure, be it moral or physical. Their sense seemed to be that of If they could thrive in a realm where no rules applied, why couldn't everyone else? Wizards feared and fought them because their own abilities were confined within a structure, the so-called natural order of things. Their strength lay in their skill at weaving lesser patterns into greater ones. Demons took delight in tearing any and all such patterns to bits. The stronger the mage, the more powerful the demon attracted to his work. They would attack, and the mage would pray his wards were sufficient to hold them at bay. Because of the forces involved, those conflicts occasionally had a spillover into the tangible world, and as with any battle, those after effects weren't pretty. That was how common folk came to fear demons, to the extent that even wholly natural disasters were blamed on them. Certainly, the cataclysm had been, though Thorn had always doubted that. Any demon capable of wreaking such havoc on a global scale wouldn't have stopped there. It would gleefully have shattered the world entire. Still in awe, Thorn told himself. By rights and everything I've ever heard, having a demon imprisoned in the rock should have made this the most unstable of foundations.
Do I surprise you then, little Magish?
Damnation! Will you please stay out of my mind? I'm trying to concentrate here.
You think too much. Action would be better.
When I'm ready.
Your time is not our own.
What's that supposed to mean? He shouldn't have spoken aloud, shouldn't have heeded the demon in the slightest. The distraction was just enough to open the tiniest crack in the ramparts of his concentration. He heard the sound of wings, so vast that each sweep could be mistaken for the pulse of a hurricane, beheld in his mind's eye a glory so pure it couldn't be described. That was at one and the same moment the embodiment of the demon's chaos and the antithesis of it. He looked to his dreams, and it was there. Looked to his imagination, and it was there. It was at the heart of laughter. It was the radiance that eased the shadow thrown by grief. The blood that burned beneath its breast likewise filled his own. But where he was flesh transcended by the powers he had learned to wield, this was a creature whose essence was magic, barely restrained within a physical casement. The dragon smiled. The demon spoke.
Drumheller.
Thorn felt tears, for the first time in over a decade, but no longer of sorrow. He wept from awe, and a wonder that swept across the wasteland of his soul like a spring rain, as though he were once more the farmer surveying his fields after planting, beholding not simply the fact of things, but how all those disparate elements acted together to bring forth new life. He hadn't realized his wounds had gone so deep, or that he'd buried them beneath so thick a scab to mute their awful pain. The best part of him had been numb for so long. In following the path of his life, he'd somehow lost his way.
My child, Drumheller.
I know, he said, every part of him tingling as though an electrical storm had passed by him.
You gave your word.
I know. He blinked to restore himself fully to his cell and the task before him, but instead found his spirit cast once more into the wild ocean that was the demon's power. Only now it had become a perceptual maelstrom that for all his own strength and skill he was unable to master. He knew how to swim, but only as a man. He had no sense here of how to be a fish, and so was swept helplessly away to the top of Elora's eyrie. At precisely the stroke of midnight, on the last night of Elora's 12th year, the wizards come for her. They are her keepers, the high priests of a religion that doesn't officially exist, charged on peril of life and soul across the 12 domains, with her care and protection, one representative from each realm, rotated each year, so that on this special day there will be 12 sets of 12 to stand by her. She never sees any of them for more than a month. Each new moon brings a new face, or so she assumes. She has no way of knowing for sure. Beyond the obvious differences in their respective races, they are all masked, hence their name, presenting her with the same unchanging visage, day in, day out. Swept helplessly away to the apartments of the Princess Anacre. Anacre stands on the wraparound balcony of her rooms and stares up at Elora's eyrie, not bothering to mask the emotions that turn her cheeks ghost pale and her eyes the color of blood sand. Thorn shuddered at the backwash of old and bitter hatreds, resonating off both girl and woman like stones from the bottom of a fire pit, deceptively cold to the touch, but rich with the memory of what it had been like to burn, needing only a reminder and a surge of desire to bring them once more to blazing life. He sat cross-legged in the darkness of his cell and tried with fierce desperation to seal the doors and windows of his perceptions, sick with the realization that it was a lost cause. The more he used his talent, especially while he was coupled to the demon, and seemingly to this dragon as well, the wider and more deeply ranged his insight, all the more acutely to the case of Elora and Anacre because of the bondings between them. Their feelings came together in him, the one striking resonant chords in the other, forming twisting riptides of passion that he could no more escape than control. "It's an honor," he hears the king say, and looks around before he can stop himself, realizing too late that both voice and scene are part of Anacre's memory, and he wonders if she is just as privy to the secrets of his own past. A mask lies between father and daughter, on a silken pillow surrounded by a badge of office. It is the thing of beauty, a human face interpreted by the finest artisans of the Vale folk. Perfect in every aspect, it has as little substance as gossamer, yet is as expressionless and impenetrable as a statue. Anacre will not even touch it, for within her is the certainty that once donned, the mask will leave its mark on her forever, like the harshest brand. "I don't want it," she says, and those who watch look amongst themselves in dismay. The king has a certain tone, used when he is not to be swayed, and woe betide any who dare to cross him in such a mood. Even at 13, his daughter matches it. Being a father, for all he loves her dearly, he doesn't notice. "This is to be worn by those who serve the sacred Princess Elora," he explains, though his manner makes plain he would much rather simply be obeyed. "It was made for you. You will be the first to attend her." "I don't want it," she says again in the same certain voice. "It's an honor." "I don't want it. I am a princess." "I am your king. It is my will." "I don't care." "I don't ask you to understand, Anacre, nor even that you approve. I do require your obedience." He's slain men for less. He's a throwback to a harder age, which is fortuitous because these are bloody times. He fought a pitched battle on his wedding day and would have perished had his fiancée not led her own troops from the altar to his rescue. She was as courageous as he, as skilled in the arts of war, and often rode beside him in the field. Her true vocation, though, was governance, and they divided their roles accordingly. He defended the realm, and she ran it, until the cataclysm when the king was summoned home to discover his wife and son, Anacre's twin, among the casualties, the one dead, the other missing. In their place, a lost soul, thrown among his household like a changeling, and treated much the same. Over the decades since, he's stayed closer to home, trying to shape his hand to the quill pen instead of the sword. He masters the strategy of statecraft and the art of persuasion, but he never loses the air of the warrior. All who deal with him know that they have but to scratch his surface, and silk will quickly give way to the steel underneath. In these early days, however, when Elora's provenance had been established and decisions must be made about her future, the pain of loss is still too raw. He has no patience, especially with those he loves. She is her father's daughter, a match for him in every way, but she is too young, and he, determined absolutely. She will wear the mask and attend Elora for her allotted month. Instead, she flees. The images of her lasted until she passed beyond the palace walls. They were the limits of the demon's range, of what transpired beyond. It had no interest and less care, and for that Thorn was profoundly grateful. He was close enough to shrieking madness as it was from this mad cacophony. Elora isn't in her room. And in that moment, resonating as he was from Anacre's memories, Thorn was gripped by the wild fear that she had fled her fate as well. For the palace staff, that means panic, as though a marauding army has suddenly materialized within the gates. If any among the wizards feel the same, those feelings are safely hidden behind their masks. They don't need much of a search to find her. She isn't trying to hide. She has simply exchanged bed for garden and nestled herself in the crook of one of the oak's main branches. The wizards surround her, spacing themselves at double arm's length apart as though this is part of the ceremony. They take great care to stay on the flagstone border. None take a step toward her, nor edge even so much as a tiptoe into the grass. They stand as they stare. She stares back for a time, and then goes back to sleep. Thorn couldn't help a smile at the sight, and wondered how long the stalemate would last. Then his smile was gone as he beheld a burgher with a public sitting room bites his thumbnail. The bluff Daikini, the same merchant Thorn saw earlier with the king's minister of state, spits in on a fire. Resonances of the deed and thoughts behind it pulsing through the stones of the palace, blurring Thorn's focus like a splash of water across a window pane.
"His value, damn it,"
the Daikini says.
"Her being here, the sacred princess, serves a purpose."
"Probably said the same last place she lived," counters his companion, equally rich with drink, unable to sleep, unwilling to leave, both men falling back on the traditional means of passing the time before tomorrow's ceremony.
"Look what happened there."
"Sore land, bugger your eyes! Our land!"
"Not if we say different,"
intrudes a new voice, as though silver bells had been turned old blades. "The Vale's lord's proportions are all wrong. Too little breadth to go with his impossible height. He is a stick figure, half again as tall as a tall man, forced to duck his head to pass beneath most doorways. Only the ceremonial gates afford him an easy entry."
"We have rights,"
the burgher grumbles, oblivious to his companion's cautionary shush.
"Which we honor," the lord replies, "as we expect to be honored in kind. Wherein do we hinder your commerce?"
"There are better ways, is all I'm saying."
"For you, I'm sure. How so for us? Be thankful, merchant. We accept our trespass in our domains. As you charge for your goods and services, so do we." "She's Daikini," the burgher said with an unsteady lunge to his feet. "She's human. Belongs to their own kind. Stand by 'em."
Thorn found himself turned violently away from the scene, once more bound to his own flesh, breath bouncing out of him in a single great acceleration that doubled him over. He's been punched to less effect. "Are they mad?" he whispered, because that was as loud as he could manage.
"They are what they are, and do what they do. It's no concern of yours."
"Elora Danan is—" This was louder, almost full voice.
"When you are free, when my child is safe."
"Then help me keep these damnable visions out of my head."
"Ignore them."
"Easier said, demon."
"You have no need to look."
He knew that, but he was curious, and there was always a sight, a scrap of conversation to catch his interest. "I'll do my best."
"Once you begin, little mage, my offspring's life is yours alone to behold."
He knew that, too. Another reason for holding back. A mistake, the smallest hesitation, would mean the child's death. He didn't want to think about how the demon would react. Again comes the sound of wings, only this time the glory manifests itself in the form of a human child, standing at the open balcony doors of a private sitting room. More than boy, less than girl, framed and age combined to confuse any onlooker as to which, wearing clothes like a second skin, that splinter the glow of hearth fire and candles as though the fabric is spun crystal. A marvel to look upon, even as Thorn realizes the child as the troubadour who'd spoken to him on the esplanade, but he can't help wondering how bright sun might be reflected, and knows that such a terrible beauty would be the last thing his eyes ever beheld. Knows as well that his bearing witness to this conversation is no accident, that somehow this child is responsible. "You are not what we expected, Kiran Dinir," says another voice of silver bells, this one with edges sheathed by ways of greeting. Consort to the Vale Lord, the sheer force of the woman's personality makes her chair a throne, and the suite an extension of her own otherworldly palace. She is robed for bed, and while one servant offers cider in a goblet of wrought gold, two maids comb and braid her hair. No easy task, since it is twice as long as she is tall, and like all her race, she is very tall. The child blows a tiny puff of breath into its own cup, and immediately steam rises from liquid heated almost to boiling. "Be glad I've come at all, lady." The child's hair is a mass of unruly spikes, as though someone has taken a knife to it without any concern other than it must be short. No sleeves to the shirt either, for what looks to be the same reason. "I am Queen Magister of the realms beyond," the woman says, the frost in her voice easily overmatching the poor hearth's valiant efforts. "I stand second among the assembly to Shalindria herself. Do not be impertinent with me." "And I and my brethren would have our host see us, complete with thy keenly name to match their features. You are but a single aspect of the Vale folk. We are of earth and air, and fire and water, flesh and spirit conjoined, mind and passion, real and dream, transcending all boundaries, making all one. We come to this assembly in freedom and friendship. You are far too trusting. Your power has made you arrogant. Perhaps so, but none of us shall break the peace we all of us swore upon Elora Danan's birth." "My lord was provoked." "Your lord should know better." "And what of the Daikini who assaulted my lord with words and blows? Will none reprove him?" "Your lord took care of that. I doubt any will raise their hand to you and yours again." "Now, perhaps. But what will happen when they have that accursed brat to stand as their champion?" The child favors its cider, and though its eyes are hooded, almost closed, Thorn feels transfixed by its gaze. "According to the prophecy," is the infernally calm reply, "Elora Danan is to stand champion for us all," an ever so slight emphasis on the last word. The Queen Magister makes a rude comment. "We're fools," she mutters, casting the words somewhere between a growl and a snarl, "casting everything we have, everything we are, at hazard. And for what? A promise of better times. Perhaps times are good enough the way they are. Perhaps we all should leave well enough alone." She sweeps to her feet and past the child over onto her balcony, letting the night wind play with gown and hair, and hoping it will cool her temper. "The cataclysm manifested itself in every domain," Kiernan tells her, holding out its cup for seconds and accepting it with a smile so charming it brings an instant response in kind from the maid. "Tir's Leen was destroyed so utterly that stone was not left on stone, and even those were ground to powder. Only Elora Danan survived. Whatever struck at her, lady, is a power to be reckoned with. A power that's not been seen since. As you yourself know, only a fool tweaks the sleeping dragon's tail." Kiernan nods its head in amusement acknowledged. "I've heard the saying," it says. The queen turns to face the room, leaning hands and body against the railing, gown draped enticingly across her long, lithe form. "What will happen tonight, do you think?" "I don't know." "I find that hard to believe. I thought you and yours knew everything." The mockery in her is gentle and underlain with a sense of true regret. She depends on this child more than she cares to admit. "Allies we don't trust, a champion in whom we have no faith, a ceremony whose outcome is totally unknown." Her voice trails off. "And a prophecy, lady, that's part and parcel of the history of every domain. Every seer from every realm had the same vision of one who will take the shadow and restore its true balance with the light." "I know. I heard those words from our own sage's lips, as did my mother, and hers before her, and hers before that. Suppose they're wrong, or it's a lie, or the opposition's too great. Our hopes are too high, our need too desperate. Have we an alternative?" "Elora Danan," she makes her dismissal plain. "Yet you came, lady, yet you stay." "They're afraid," Thorn whispered, as though afraid of being overheard, understanding at last, and with a rueful twist of the mouth that might have been a smile, the origin of the phrase about walls having ears. The sound of his own voice broke the cord that linked him to the Vale Queen's apartment and brought his awareness once more back to his cell. "I'm afraid." This a fraction louder. The demon said nothing. That made him angry. He wanted the contact, needed the focus for his anger. Through his head Through his head raced a score of arguments, like a stampede, passionate and lawyerly reasons why the planned sorcery was an abomination. Time and again he opened his mouth as though to say, "I will not do this," but nothing emerged, not even air. From every turret of the palace, a trumpet voluntarily burst forth, measure building upon measure until the fanfare reached out across city and bay to the headlands beyond. Sunrise. Where had the night gone? Thorn looked at his hands, where they rested in the hollow formed by his crossed legs. He closed them into fists and placed them against his breast. When he reached forward, his spirit moved, his flesh remained. She had no aura. The figure lying before him, so far as he could tell, nothing beyond the shape of her face and form remained to tie her to the woman she had been. At the same moment, insight shatter-scarred his vision throughout the palace to show him whatever the demon saw. He stood, his spirit at the woman's head. He stood by Elora Danan. She wakes like a cat, wide-eyed and wary, every part of her alert from the moment she opens her eyes. The vizards stand 3 rows deep, utterly still sculptures in a stone garden, forming a wall about her living one. Beyond, her maids and attendants, none of them happy to be here. She stretches slowly, lazily, drawing out every moment, and lets them see her smile at the temptation to stay here all through the day and night to come. There is no ceremony without her. That makes her important. But if she is truly that important, she also knows they'll find a way to get to her, probably wreck her garden in the process. Realization and response came as one, though prompting action as she unfolds herself with a child's glorious lack of stiffness and drops lithely to the ground. She loves to walk barefoot in the grass, and especially enjoys the way it tickles the soles of her feet, but as she craves respect today, she feels obliged to offer it in return. She kneels and brushes her palms across the earth, whispering a quick farewell. Then she's on her feet once more, making her way along the stone path she'd wound from the border to her central tree, so she could stroll without disturbing fresh plantings. The vizards make way with a smooth precision that looks choreographed, as though every moment, even the most inspired improvisation, had been foreseen. A year's number flank her single file on either side, 12 to the right, 12 to the left, clearing a path well ahead of her and keeping it so well behind. At a stately, almost solemn pace, they bring her to her bathing room. It's nowhere near her rooms, of course, built specifically for this day and this one purpose, as is every item within. A whole new staff of attendants await her. No one she's seen before, or ever will again. Only the ones who will actually touch her are real servants. The others are nobility. They stand respectfully in the background, watching while Elora is scrubbed till her skin glows, then laid out on a padded table for a full-body massage. At the last, a soak in a pool scattered with rose petals. Her skin is rubbed and oiled until it is as soft to the touch as a newly bloomed flower. Her hair is cleaned and combed and brushed before being drawn up into what will become, after many hours' work, an ornate arrangement of waves and curls, interwoven with precious gems. There is an attendant for each of her hands and feet, shaping the nails, filing them smooth, decorating them with paint. When they are done, others take their place to apply her cosmetics. Every movement, no matter how slight, to the smallest twitch, is answered by a flinch from the maids. They expect the worst. They have the wardrobe master as their example, but Elora doesn't say a word, nor does she stir, save for an occasional shift of position to make herself a bit more comfortable. It's as though she wears a mask herself. He stood by a knackery. As the last echoes of the fanfare fade, the Princess Royal strips to the skin and dives into a pool, alone and unattended. The water isn't much warmer than the bay itself. Her immersion raises immediate goosebumps from the top to toe. But she doesn't mind, as she drives herself from end to end with a methodical stroke that sends her streaking through the water like a fish. She paces herself through a dozen laps before calling a halt, lolling face up in the surface until, with a smooth motion that appears deceptively easy, she arches her back like a drawn bow and rolls into a dive that takes her to the tiled bottom. She stays far longer than would have been thought possible for a person, then kicks herself straight up, grasping the lip of the pool as she shoots into the air and levers herself to her feet. It is a magnificent display, but she is conscious today, as she hasn't been for years, that while she enjoys the water, her brother has been one with it. He stood by Elora Danan. There are 12 elements to Elora's gown, brought out and laid before her with due ceremony. Stockings first, with garters to hold them in place about her thighs, and then her shoes, followed by a wrap of gossamer silk to serve as an undergarment. The morning is mostly gone. The robing will take them nearly all the way to sunset. Thorn shook his head to banish the growing sense of weight from his own shoulders, as though each layer of clothes on Elora was a weight of stones to crush the both of them. Anacary has no truck with the concoction brought for her. One look is enough to have it banished from her sight, along with all the functionaries sent to decorate her in the bargain. A chamberlain comes to offer protests. A glare from her makes them think better of the idea. The Chancellor comes bearing her father's staff of office with entreaties to find her already in uniform and buckling on her sword. "Highness," he begins, he's known all his life, and has earned her respect by treating her from the first as he would an equal. "You cannot do this," he says. "You cannot stop me." She finishes braiding her hair and reaches reflexively for her silver clip to anchor it, only to find that its accustomed place on her bureau is empty. After a fractional hesitation, she chooses another. "I am Colonel Commander of the Red Lions, Chancellor. My place is with my troops." "With respect, your place is where your father tells you to be." "By his side, you mean, watching him bow and scrape to rulers who, at their best, are no more than his peers, buying favor he believes with that pathetic scrap of a girl." "You have no faith in the prophecy, Anacary?" "Like many of my father's guests, Philemon, I have no faith in her, and I trust none within these walls whom I do not know. Hell," her mouth makes a wry twist, "if history serves, I should probably trust least those I know best. If my father wants me, he must take me as I am, his finest warrior." "You would wear edged steel to the Ascension?" The old man is scandalized. "For some of the Vale folk, Princess, the merest touch of iron is fatal. Moreover, as part of the covenant, none present at the ceremony will come armed. So I'll save him the embarrassment and stay away." "Child, you are too willful." "Have a care, Chancellor." Her voice goes very soft, and her eyes glitter like ice crystals in a sun that offers light, but not the slightest bit of warmth. "Remember to whom you speak." "And you, Royal Highness, for whom I speak." "We've played this game before, my father and I. He should have learned his lesson better." "Please, Anacary, the king does you the courtesy of requesting your presence." "Were to command, Lord Chancellor, I would refuse. My place tonight is elsewhere." Thorn yearned to reach out for the dragon, to recapture the sense of joy and possibility that had swept through him. He could barely recall the sensation, and their loss left the taste of ash in his mouth, as though the burning within his breast had consumed him.
"You wonder."
There was accusation in the demon's voice, and betrayal. "I know," he said lamely. "I'm sorry." Then another thought, given voice without surprising force and focus. "You see everything within the palace walls, am I right? You are the palace walls."
"So?"
"Can you find me the one they call Magus, Elora's protector?"
"Other than yourself, little mage?"
"Other than myself, yes."
"And if I do so?"
"I gave my word. But if the leaders of the Maison is false, what does that say of the Magus has brought to England? If there's a danger here for Elora Danan, I have to know. You left her alone before, demon," he said finally. "Don't do so again, I beg you."
"You gave your word, meat. Be true to it."
With the hands of his spirit form, he reached out to the woman's forehead, above the mystical third eye, as Anacary had with him, and found the flesh cool to the touch. The glow that answered was likewise very faint. There was life in the most technical sense, or rather the potential for life, but no true being. He touched fingertips to his own brow, then lips, lastly heart. He spread his hands to shoulder width, and between them left a filament of glittering silver, a spider strand of star stuff. His breathing slowed. Hers remained non-existent, as he leaned forward to run a line from her forehead to her lips, to her heart and beyond, marking all the crucial access points of power on her body. When he was done, he'd drawn a stick figure on her flesh, and her own skin was chilled. He felt her heart, and didn't need insight to tell the strength of it. He placed his right hand on her temple, the other over her left breast as gently as if he was her lover, and leaned forward to touch his lips to hers. He blew a puff of air into her mouth. Energy crackled behind his eyes, sending sizzles throughout the vast network of nerves that charged his own flesh, and he cast a portion of it through his hands and into her. It was like ladling water into a whirlpool. All that was offered was swallowed instantly, leaving neither trace nor effect behind. Another puff of breath, another cast of power, and another after that, and another. He paused, swaying, suddenly giddy, yet never releasing his hold on her. His pulse thundered, smearing vision with monstrous swaths of scarlet, and his muscles burned so that he couldn't manage a decent breath of his own. Little spasmoid trembles skibbled the length and breadth of him, and what he wanted more than anything was to let go and walk away. He shook his head, awe mingling with stark terror, because this was the comparatively easy part. Far worse was yet to come. His heart seemed to pause, then caught itself with an exceptionally powerful beat. Pardon. Of such force it shook his chest from within. Hers did the same. He panted. So did she. He had to move his face away quickly, because what air remained in her lungs had been there quite an age and had become stale beyond endurance. He drew a breath as deep as he could manage, and felt her chest expand to follow. From beneath his right hand, insight showed him a growing network of glowworm tracings beneath her skin, extending outward from her head. At the same time, each pulse of her heart stirred blood that had been too long dormant. It moved like sludge at first, but grew more fluid with every passing beat. There was texture to her skin now, a faint roseate tint underlying its blue-white color.
Impressive.
Meaningless. He kept his replies short, to the point of rudeness. He had too much need of his strength to spare any in idle conversation.
The form lives. It breathes.
I live, demon. I breathe. In that we are one. All that she has, thus far, comes from me. She lives, if you can call it that, because I sustain her. What of the Magus, demon? What of Elora Danan? Elora wonders if the whole point of the day is to kill her. Bad enough to wear new shoes. These arch her feet to a degree she's never found comfortable, and she's had them on for what seems like an eternity. No food either, and only the occasional sip of water that serves to intensify her thirst rather than slake it. Her clothes are too ornate, and there are simply too many of them to allow her to go to the bathroom. That has been made plain to her, for as far back as she can remember, as the mechanics of the ceremony involve, she must simply endure. She doesn't understand now any more than then, but she's learned how to obey. Not that it matters. She's wrapped so tightly she can't even sit. A backing board has been provided for her to lean against for those rare moments when she is allowed to ease the strain. She has no breasts to speak of. She's still far more girl than woman, but a corset gives her the illusion of them. Over that goes an undergown that hugs what passes for her figure all the way to her ankles, effectively hobbling her. She can no more take a decent stride than a decent breath, and she wonders if the wizards will have to carry her to her altar. It was as though Thorn's eyes had turned to prisms, more faceted than any diamond, each window on a different scene, and the harder he willed himself not to see, the more irresistibly his attention was drawn. A knackery crosses the wayward with learning strides, pace and manner proclaiming her mastery of both self and space. Stables and barracks are a hive of activity, as mounts are groomed and troopers hurry to finish their own equipage. The lions are to ride today in full ceremonial regalia, as though due for a royal coronation and other state occasions, which means every piece of tack and armor has to be polished to a mirror finish. Accoutrements are purely for show, pennant lances with blunt tips and no shields,
breastplates and helms that look mightily impressive, but aren't worth much of a damn either. She passes from light to shadow, near absolutes of both, and turns a glare on the looming column of Elora's Eyrie, as though it is some hostile redoubt, and she is its determined conqueror. "Jalaby!" she calls, her voice topping the workaday din of the yard as it would a battlefield, to be answered as quickly by her adjutant. "Dread lady," he calls back on the run from the stables. "Don't call me that! I've told you 1,000 times. Highness will do." It's an old joke between them. He has permission to call her by her name. Proprieties be damned, though he never does. "I want a change in regimental orders for the day. Lady," even sections to ride as directed. "Odd in patrol kit. Keep them neat, Jalaby. I want them looking respectable. But I also want to wear lances and shields." "Has m'lady some special intelligence we should know about?" "Only what I was born with, Sergeant Major. I'm as fond of theatre as anyone. If my father wants to put on a pageant to impress his people and his guests, that's his prerogative. I just want to make sure there aren't surprises we encounter along the way are pleasant ones. See to it, will you?" "As your Highness commands." And he's off, with a bellow that makes hers pale in comparison. "Not very trusting in nature, are you?" This new voice brings a surprising, shy smile to her lips. "No more than you would be, Modry, in similar circumstances." The Castellan acts as a hard shadow as the tower, but Anacary doesn't seem to mind. In dress, he appears as casual as she, wool as finely woven as silk, and butter soft leather, all in signature black. But she knows the mail shirt beneath his tunic is proof against even the sharpest points. As for weapons, the sword that hangs off his left hip is the least of what he carries. Hers is a less overtly martial presentation, cotton and fine wool, but no leather save for gloves and boots. Her trousers are snug to her ankles, with a stirrup hooked over the arch of her boot to keep their line taut. She normally wears white. Not so today. Her uniform is a richly royal blue, more like deep water ocean than sky, with a broad scarlet stripe down the outside seam of her trousers to proclaim her rank. Junior officers wear a thinner stripe, and troopers none at all. The tunic covers her hips, fits as snugly, its sole ornamentation thick strands of braided flogging colored a shade darker than the tunic itself, that run from her stand-up collar straight down the button front and out the lower hem, with horizontal lines set at intervals along the way. Similar lacings, galons, are woven around her sleeve hems and up the forearm, ending just below her elbow with a representation of the royal crest. On her collar are the only bright elements to the ensemble, the regimental insignia of a lion rampant done in scarlet thread, together with the laurel wreath, crown, and crossed swords of her rank in silver. She, too, wears mail under her coat and carries far more weapons than are immediately apparent. A casual observer might think her overmatched by her companion. That is a mistake, and both she and Modry know it. "This is a day of celebration, Princess," he tells her, shortening his stride to match her pace as she continues her tour of the yard. "Yet I note you have confined my personal escort to barracks, with a full troop of your own to mind them. They fired at a mating pair of eagles yesterday. We hunt eagles. In your own land, perhaps, not Angwin. One of them stooped. My men feared they were under attack, and fired as well at a merchant vessel. They were challenged. They are guests, my Lord Castellan, and will be reminded most forcefully to behave as such, I assure you. My dear Anacary, I hardly think you're anything to fear from a score of them. I've seen them fight, and fought beside them." The banter leaves his tone, and he takes her hand gently in his. "You should have stayed. You are one of us, too wild of heart to live a life in such a cage as this." As gently she disengages. "These are my people. This is my home." "Worth your life, are they?" His challenge is flippant. Her reply is not. She fixes him with a calm and level gaze, and speaks as truly as she knows how. "Yes, Castellan, they are." "Do they feel the same in return?" "The one isn't contingent on the other." "You left once, and came back." They cross the Aries shadow, and the Castellan suddenly stops, staring at nothing, but with his head cocked to give better reception to some sound only he can hear,
as suddenly alert as he would be on a combat patrol about to engage the enemy.
"Impossible," he breathes. "The prisoner!"
"What of him?" Her tone grows chill.
"I could swear—"
"Don't keep us in suspense, Castellan. Finish your sentence." He blinks and looks at her as though for the first time.
"Why are you so angry, my pet?"
"I am not your damn anything, Castellan. I thought that was understood from the start."
"You are unfathomable sometimes, Carrie."
"A knackery, if you please. My brother was the only one I let him call me that."
"You never seemed to mind before."
"You never noticed."
"Is that why you left me? Did you truly believe I took you so for granted?"
"What was to believe, Motri? It was plain fact, like horses having 4 legs. What about the prisoner?"
"I had this sense of being watched."
"Considering who's in residence and the powers they command, that's hardly a revelation."
"I know the taste of the Vale folk. This was different."
"Legend reputes the castle is haunted."
"It wasn't a ghost."
"I didn't mean a ghost. We have demons here, didn't you know?"
"Nor demon neither."
"The Nelwyn's locked up tight, Castellan, and thanks to you, probably broken all to bits."
"What I did was done for your protection, Princess."
"How reassuring."
"We mean you and yours no harm. The Myzan come as friends."
"And the Magus?"
"Likewise, only more so."
"Don't call me my pet again. I feel like you're casting a change spell."
"Would you were so easily tamed. Peace, Princess. It was only said in jest."
He holds up his hands in a placating gesture, meeting Anacari's famous gaze with the most irresistibly charming of smiles.
"Forgive me."
When she says nothing, he tries a slight change of subject.
"And the prisoner?"
She rounds on him. "Castellan, I have more things on my mind than that pathetic little creature you seem hell-bent on tormenting. You think he's watching us? Find me a scryer to back that up with proof, and we'll proceed accordingly. Until then, I have too much else to do, and with all due respect, you're in the way." He takes a step to follow, but Sergeant Major Jalaby chooses that moment to hurry a section from the stables for saddling and inspection, and the yard is instantly filled with a score of men and mounts, hooves cracking sharply on cobblestone, the air alive with snorts and whinnies, and the occasional neigh, commands and cursing flashing back and forth with practiced enthusiasm. Everywhere the Castellan turns, he finds his pathway blocked, and with each of those, Anacary puts more distance between them. Modri and Jalaby lock eyes. Without breaking contact, the old campaigner tilts his head a little down and to the side and spits and smiles. Modri smiles back, and seeing what is in his eyes, the men nearest the sergeant major reach for swords and lances. The Castellan turns on his heel and strides away. "He knows," Thorn said with a small wail. "I'm watching."
"Suspects."
"For such as him, suspicion is certainty."
"All the more reason, little Magus, for you to focus on the task at hand."
"Madness!" he cried. "This and me!" There was sweat on his face, but he couldn't break contact with either hand to wipe it off. He wanted to sleep and remembered a day, an age past, a lifetime gone, spent hefting bags of seed corn to his barn. Each had been as big as he and weighed more. The only way to carry them was to bend his body double and use his back as the barrow. He didn't hurt while he was working, he simply got more and more tired. His muscles recovered within a day or so, but it was the better part of a week before he came out of this eerie stupor, as though he'd walked up to the edge of the final abyss and leaned over to see death was home. Thankfully, no, but the Reaper had somehow wrapped Thorn in a piece of itself, a lingering taste of what would someday be in store as a caution about being so foolish again. Of course he hadn't listened. His whole life since, he sometimes thought, had become an endless and madcap reel along the edge of that chasm. The longer he procrastinated, the weaker he became, the less able even to survive the spell, much less succeed with it. "Can you do that to Elora Danan?" he heard himself ask. "But having done this," he heard himself reply, "what will she say when she sees me again? Demons are cast out of human hosts, not the other way round. Can't be any worse than what she's said and done already, am I right?" As an attempt at humor, it wasn't much, certainly not in the way the Brownies' league, but he decided to let it pass. The discussion was academic anyway. His die had long since been cast. He would see this through to the end, whatever came. As though that realization was a cue, the room about him grew close and heavy. oppressive in the way air can be heralding an approaching storm. There was a sour stench of burning that left a metallic tinge at the back of his tongue, the harbinger of a lightning bolt. His mouth was dry, but licking his lips brought no relief. His tongue was as raspy as sandpaper, and every part of him rapidly grew bloated and swollen. Summers were like this back home, so steamy that that thought itself took an effort and movement was out of the question. Salvation, then, was a soak in the stream beyond the house, and some heartfelt prayers for an evening breeze. The smell made him gag. He had no name for it, save that it was awful. He'd been a farmer. He knew the stench of nature. He'd been a warrior, albeit reluctantly, and knew the same of battlefields. He'd looked upon the face of evil. At the time he'd thought ultimate evil, and gotten a taste of that foulness as well. No comparison. This was far worse. He tried breathing through his mouth to no avail. He knew from long experience that the nose quickly grew accustomed to scents. It was simply a matter of waiting until he became used to this one. Only that didn't happen. If anything, it got worse. The miasma coiled around him like a lover, pressing against every part of him, soaking like water into a sponge through clothes, and then, to his horror, flesh as well. To his outsight, he remained unchanged. What his insight showed, Thorn made him want to howl like one demented. His skin was boiling off his bones, great pustules bursting forth like gas bubbling from a tar pit, spreading the foulness over him. Nothing of him was anchored anymore. He felt organs slide within him as his own flesh sloughed off bones, and then the bones themselves began to putrefy. There was rot in his mouth, in his heart, in his soul. Not the clean decay of nature, but a betrayal of it, as though the component pieces of himself were there only for show. They served no other function. And yet, as the concept of eyes melted from him, he found other means of sight. A concept of being grounded in a single solid physical form gave way to one more akin to quicksilver, where no aspect stayed stable for longer than a whim. He thought at first he was being plunged into a maelstrom, but soon realized that was wrong. In a maelstrom, the elements flow in the same general direction. There's a pattern and purpose to it that was non-existent here. He struggled to reassert himself, but found no self to focus on. He had a body, untouched and unharmed, reduced now to a vessel as hollow as the woman's, but the bonds that linked flesh and spirit were no more. Too late, he wondered about a trap. 2 hosts for the demon, for the price of 1. "O ye of little faith!" His voice, or the demon's, he couldn't tell. He hated the stones about him, looked for claws with which to tear at them, laughing at the thought of the great keep above collapsing into rubble and dust, as Tirasleen had done. His dream, or the demon's, he didn't want to know. He saw the thread of his own soul, the one thing left him that remained untouched by his transformation. Yet even as he watched, a darker strand reached out to embrace it, winding itself around and around until the two became inextricably intertwined. The intricate knotwork twisted more tightly together, it seemed to him, than a single rope had been formed, the dark and light equally balanced. In desperation, he lunged forward to grab his soul and hold it fast, forgetting he had nothing left resembling hands. It shattered. Like gossamer soap bubbles, like the most fragile crystal, like life itself, blew apart before him, scattering every which way, no means to catch the bits, no means to follow. He howled. Elora whimpers and hunches herself forward, the little distance allowed her by her robes, to the dismay of her dresses, who fear she will mar their presentation and take it out on them. And in that same instant, a knackery hauls tight on her reins, so startling her horse that the animal dances nervously and almost bucks. "A knackery?" asks Jalaby the first time she's ever heard him use her name. "How many damned fanfares is that, Jalaby?" she asks through gritted teeth, projecting a calm she no longer feels in an attempt to gentle her mount. 10 of 12, I think. They're almost done." "So's the day. Procession starts at sunset. Ceremony's at midnight." "You fear treachery, Highness?" She smiles and shakes her head. "Thankfully, no. Everyone's got too much to lose should today go wrong. I just wish I knew better what it meant should things go right."
The people have faith. Probably said as much as at Tirasleen. Split off 2 sections. Sergeant, Major, have them check the city gates. I want the watchmen at their posts. So ordered, Highness. I'll do the job myself. As Jalabi leads his 20 men away at the canter, another officer joins her with a salute. I have the honor to report, Highness, that the Red Lions have taken up their assigned positions along the promenade, the esplanade, and the Royal Mile. She can see that, even without her field glasses, great crowds are gathering along the seafront and the main road, with many more thronging the city's parks. Everyone who can walk is out tonight, a housebreaker's dream, the fire brigade's nightmare. The Maison, Captain, what of them? The Castellan is in the palace, together with a pair of bodyguards, to escort the Protector Magus to the ceremony. The rest of his Thunder Riders are in quarters, as you commanded, being discreetly and properly looked after. Thorn tasted blood, not his own, coating the stone, seeping through the cracks and space between the massively hewn blocks. So many men, so quickly done to death. Night herons tearing at flesh as easily as they feasted on souls. There was joy in him, a hunger for more. Something's wrong, he thought, his gaze focusing on the barracks. The waryard was deserted, troops properly deployed throughout the city, servants going about their business within the palace. As normal, a scene to the casual eye as could be expected. He saw a shimmer in the air, a faint coruscation, much like the heat haze, marking the presence of what first glance told him was a minor glamour that served the same function as his cloak. Anyone crossing the yard or looking down from the battlements would pass over the barracks without a second thought. But he saw through the demon's eyes, and those perceptions told him this something was far more insidious. A spell of such extraordinary sophistication and subtlety that lay folk and sorcerers would be bedazzled to equal effect. All would see what they expected to see, and no more. A pain lanced up from deep within, as if some greater power had taken hold and snapped him in two, as he might the wishbone of a turkey. The walls were blood. The air was blood. He was blood, awash in it, alive in it. Around him were scattering the shards of his souls. But he could no longer tell which were his and which the demon's. There was scarlet everywhere. Everything looked the same. The second pain was greater than the first. He thought the change spell agony, but it was nothing compared with this. The third spasm broke his consciousness as he himself had smashed his soul. He was no more than the idea of life, the concept of being, not I think therefore I am, or even I am. No I at all, but simply am. He knew there'd be a fourth spasm and a fifth. It would go on until the demon's child was delivered or he ceased to be. It wasn't a tangible awareness. He lacked the coherence to string together even a single thought, more akin to a fundamental knowledge imprinted on the primal fabric of his being, like the body's understanding at birth of how to take a breath, or the heart itself to beat, or even just the notion of thought itself. From that nowhere, he drew back to himself a sense of self, an I, to place before every other concept, a name to fit the pronoun. I am, followed by, I am Thorn Drumheller. Like waking up, only much more slowly. Begin with nothingness, a transitory oblivion, or so it seems unless one is gifted or cursed enough to remember all the evenings as dreams, that ends with the opening of the eyes. With sight, revelation, a rebirth of sorts. Identity, memory, awareness, answer to all the primal questions. Who am I? Where am I? What am I? Shard by shard, he found himself, accomplishing an act of choice what was normally taken for granted, assuming all the scattered, disparate elements to himself, uncaring as he went which were his and which the demon's. He felt a vibration trickle through the fabric of the foundation stones, as though the palace itself were waking with him. New enchantments, casting resonances off of powers long dormant. Nothing would come of it. They had slept too long, or too set in their ways, to take any active part in the ceremony. But they were aware, as they had not been for longer than the memory of man. "Fools!" he cried within his thoughts. "Fools! What are you doing up there?"
He wanted to hurry, that same awareness lashing him as an eager cater would a tardy mare. And the image came back to him of that day in the barn with the sacks of grain. He wanted to hurry then, too, simply to be done. Supper was waiting, and a hot bath, the sweetest reward for a miserable bear of a day. Unfortunately, desire, no matter how fervent, didn't make the bag's way any the less, or his feet plod any more nimbly. His muscles did the best they could. The task had its proper rhythm, and would be done when it was done. Making himself frantic in the process wouldn't help. He heard a final fanfare. It was precisely the moment of sunset. At that same moment, Thorn feels the doors of Elora's great hall thrown open. Within the space is alight with a multitude of candles, casting echoes off reflective paint from the ceiling overhead to create the illusion that all entering the vault of the rapidly darkening sky. The room is a symmetrical oval, 2 aisles bisecting the length and width, forming a circle where they meet. Interlaced around the chamber's circumference are the great seals of the domains. The pattern is repeated along the border of the circle, with Elora's own as the centerpiece. Between each set of seals is a section of seats for the respective domain, 3 for each of the 4 quarters. The walls describe the same arc reaching up toward the ceiling as they do from side to side, thereby preserving the room's form throughout every physical dimension. The wizards enter first, with solemn stately tread, to columns of robed masked figures, each bearing a staff of office down the central aisle, around the outer border of the central circle, and on to the end, where they turn outward to reverse direction along the perimeter of the chamber itself until they reach the entrance, filling in the lesser aisles along the way. All stand facing the dais. Next come the representatives of the domains. In every case but one, the rulers of each, that sole exception being Kieran Dinir. All the others' seats are filled, Kieran's section virtually empty. Sovereigns of the primal elements, earth and air and fire and water, of the primal states of being, flesh and the spirits, and of the primal mysteries. Some appear human because that is their true nature, others do so out of courtesy. A few, profoundly, defiantly, make not the slightest pretense. There is excitement, but it has a dangerous edge to it. None present are sure whether the night will end in joy or disaster, each determined to emerge triumphant regardless. Thorn thinks it is staring at a cheering crowd, and wonders what it will take to turn them into a mob, the festival into a riot. The room grows still. 2 sections remain, both flanking the head of the room, opposite the doorway. Then, to all appearances, the candle flames begin to dance. Tiny spots of light and color buzzing wildly throughout the air, bouncing off each other with cries of wild delight, forming ever more intricate patterns with the streamers left in their wake. Some of these, watching, respond in kind, others with grimaces of dour resignation at a display seen often before. The fairies take such negative responses as a personal challenge and redouble their efforts. The fiercer the frowns, the more infuriatingly radiant their smiles in return. Until, when the chorus of light and sound reaches its crescendo, all eyes suddenly turn as one toward the doorway. The fairies average the size of a human finger. Their queen dwarfs them by comparison, though she stands smaller than a Dakini child. Shalindria's hair is gossamer gold, so pale it nearly matches the silver of her gown, her face and form of unhuman perfection. Every aspect of her seems to float, as though she moves through water, her gown layer upon diaphanous layer, creating the sense of what lies beneath without revealing a thing. Her wings are scarcely thicker, neither large nor substantial enough to bear her aloft, yet they do so, and without noticeable effort. As she makes her way along the aisle, Engwyn's king proudly, handsomely by her side, all her companions rush to her. They take position behind her, their formation creating the illusion of a vast, glittering train that ripples and flows across the entire spectrum of visible light and color. It is a breathtaking display, beside which even the most magnificent firework display pales. When she reaches and takes her seat, it shatters, and all its very parts spinning off like plasma from a newborn star, circling up and away to their own assigned places. When the room quiets, and eyes grow once more accustomed to the less dramatic illumination of the candle glow, Thorn beholds Willow Ufgood standing in the doorway. Chapter 8. Through the demon's eyes, Thorn beheld the most magnificent lie. The figure is that, in a way, Willow has never been, and handsome in a way Willow never dreamed of being. In the main, the features are his, but they've been shaped and polished to push him more toward the daikini, what most men would consider craggy good looks, a ready smile of welcome without a hint of shyness, laughing eyes that view the assemblage with true delight. This is a man whose every move and gesture proclaims a generosity of spirit to go along with his gentle strength. There are more lines than one would expect in a face of his age, testament to the price paid for the knowledge and power that swirl from his shoulders like a great cloak. His colors are white and gold, the one so pure, the other so bright, it hurts to look at him. His tunic is cut to emphasize the sweep of his powerful chest, while equally snug-fitting trousers do the same for shapely legs. His boots echo the curve of his calf, one more dynamic element in an ensemble already pushing the outer edges of fashion. Gold thread is worked through the fabric of the garments, apparently for aesthetic effect, in a random display that catches the light and amplifies it, so that every movement the sorcerer makes triggers a flashing cascade of micro-sunbursts, a display easily as dazzling as the fireworks prepared to celebrate the conclusion of the ascension. As Willow's stride eats up the distance from entrance to altar, Thorn has a suddenly absurd vision of dust motes, scrambling with frantic desperation to get out of his way, lest the slightest contact mar the perfection of his costume. Thorn can't watch, can't bear to, and yet cannot tear his eyes away. This false Willow is too splendid, a glory for any living being, mortal or otherwise, to resist. Were he himself, he would be lost. Fortunately, the demon defines its nature by discerning the patterns in everything, and then unworking them. The threads, he realizes with a thrill of horror. The flashes. It's how they catch the light when he moves. It's a variation on the spell that has been used to cloak the barracks. Again, nothing very sinister on the face of it. The simplest kind of glamour, used by touring conjurers to place their audience in a more receptive mood, and easily deflected by any sorcerer worth their name. One of the first lessons taught any decent practitioner of the magical arts is how to recognize and protect yourself against such manipulation. It is something done automatically, yet the web being woven here is such a masterpiece of deception that simply to behold this deceiver, Thorn refuses to think of the impostor as Willow, deciding that that deceiver is the name he'll use from then on. Is to be ensnared, and once caught, the thought of protecting themselves further never more enters anyone's head. It is as though the deceiver has access to their most secret souls, that somehow he knows all present more intimately than they know themselves. Then vision blurred Thorn's sense of the chamber high above, slipping away as he scrambled desperately for purchase, as both inner and outer reality frayed faster than the threads of that napkin the Aldwin had showed him so long ago. He was 3 spirits, where there should be only one, and rapidly discovering that the strain of maintaining coherence between himself and Elora and Anacary made riding the whirlwind tiger a picnic by comparison. The demon had no concept of structure, and therefore kept trying to warp Thorn to its way of being. No matter that what the Nelwyn beheld was illusion, a simulacrum of his mind to match the substance of flesh, namely his body, still standing close by, his perceptions reacted as if this was real. When his trunk was stretched and twisted like molten toffee, a halting, gurgling grunt of agony was likewise wrenched with it. He felt the pain of growing wings, the bones of face and body cracking and reshaping into a myriad of were-forms. Dragon merged with weir, with tiny bogarts, and on toward creatures for which he neither had nor desired names. Time rolled him back into its primordial beginnings, and cast him howling to its end, flash casting through every conceivable incarnation in between. He stood at the molten heart of the world and watched it be born, basking in a heat intense enough to vaporize the strongest metal, and likewise saw it die, crumbling underfoot to ancient dust. He saw the darkness that was at the beginning of all things, and the darkness to come at the end. He saw multitudes at every hand, more aspects of himself, his world, than he had numbers to count them. But only one image of this place, this moment. In all the countless might have beens, the might yet be's, there was no other variant on this cell and this woman. Why? He whispered, unable to comprehend, refusing to accept. Special man, special place, special moment. Shut up! He screamed, terror turning his voice to a child's shriek. Leave me alone, he wanted to say. I want no part of this. I deny you. I deny myself. Let me go. He felt something slip within him, as though from his grasp, and made a frantic scramble to regain his hold. It was the demon's child. He was losing it. He had two of his own. There should have been a third, but times were hard, and his wife fell ill. The women of the village pooled their resources as midwives and healers, which were considerable, and normally they were well able to cope with almost any manner of ailments. But there was no improvement. A runner was sent for the High Alduin in hope that his magic might succeed where herbs and potions failed, but Thorn knew with sick certainty the old wizard wouldn't arrive in time. He thought he had fallen ill himself whenever he looked at Kaya. His vision of her was smudged, as though she lay beneath a filthy gray veil. He'd always thought of her as a creature of passionate primary colors, and wondered what she saw in a monochrome as dullard as he. Yet, while he watched, those colors faded. The veil darkened, skin draping itself over two prominent bones as fever stole the flesh beneath away. He fed her broth even when she pushed it away, and cleaned her when she threw it up. He sat beside her most of the day and held her close at night, trying to cast warmth from his body to hers by sheer force of will. He offered what prayers he could to any bright power he thought might listen. He knew he was losing her. He was so absorbed in his battle, he had no sense of its cost on him. All his efforts, the total focus of his being, was on restoring his wife to health, and that battle in turn resolved itself down to casting off the veil that covered her. He had no idea that he was growing as gaunt as she, as he stripped himself of all his strength and willingness to cast it over her. He never heard the sorrowing whispers of those who brought food and drink to his door, that the village would be mourning the loss of two instead of one. It was the dark of the moon on a night he'd begun to suspect would never end. The crisis had come for them both. Kaya's fever blazed hotter than a smithy furnace, yet she couldn't stop shivering. Twice he'd placed a leather strap in her mouth so she wouldn't crack her teeth. The second time, she'd near bitten it through. He'd never felt so beaten himself. He moved because he had to, each step harder than the last, to the point where he knew that if he stopped again and sat, he'd never get up. For all the exhaustion of his body, his mind had never felt so clear. About him, all was acid-etched crystal, and he thought he was surely mad because he had the wild sensation of seeing not only the surface reality of things, but the truth of them as well. The bed Kaya lay on wasn't just a piece of furniture. He could perceive the sweat and skill it took him to carve it, and beyond that, the life of the tree from whence it came. It had been an old storm-smashed rowan, and his breath caught in wonder as he spied a resonance of the dryad who'd long made it her home. He heard his name and turned to the bed, feeling his heart stutter step through a hand's clap of beats at the realization that it wasn't his Kaya who called. A child, so wee and helpless a bit, hands outstretched to both of them. Not the baby, as it was, for it wasn't even halfway through its term, but the Nelwyn it might have been. And Thorn felt its grip, at first so ferociously tight, slacken on his fingers. He closed his own hand and felt Kaya do the same, but they'd have done better trying to tackle a greased pig. The child was going, There was nothing they could do to stop it, save wish it well with a final goodbye. There was a moment when its life light faded, and the bedroom was plunged into a preternatural shadow, when Thorn wanted nothing more than to hurl himself into oblivion after it. The ache of loss made a sham of the phrase more than he could bear. Then, though, he felt a similar slippage from the figure by his side, and he knew that his wife was starting to fade as well. "No!" he cried, and repeated himself with a full-voiced bellow, "No!" He rounded on her, in such a state he didn't notice what was happening. Good thing, actually, for the shock might have stopped his own heart right then and there, as streams of colored fire erupted from eyes and hands, twisting in and out of themselves like eels as they descended on the bed to rend the veil. Fingers splayed and curled, and the power that burst from them was instantly cast as razor-edged claws. The veil tore with the puffed and soggy sound of rotten cloth, and from it came a stench of unbelievable foulness. Thorn didn't care. The intensity of the contagion only made him redouble his attack. He took her hand in both of his and anchored himself to the floor as if he were the tree their bed had been made. Come whatever may, as wild energies ripped through the pair of them, he would not let her go. He would not let her die. She didn't. That had been the night the sorceress Queen Bavmorda had claimed the fortress of Nockmaar for her own. The child, like many other innocents across the shires, had sickened because it had been touched and tainted by the darking energies of those abominable conjurations. Their souls were to merge with the mortar that bound the walls and battlements together, to armor them against every form of mystical assault. In Thorn's family, the spell found an especially fertile field to take root in, for he was power mainly ignorant of itself, existing more as untapped potential than actuality, and therefore defenseless. His wife had none, but the baby had, in full measure. Had he not stood firm, all three of them would have been lost. Instead, two survived, and the third was blessed with a clean passing. That long-ago night had been a test of strength. This, he realized, was one of control, to judge whether he was master of his passions and terrors, and through them, his powers, or their slaves. He felt another slippage within himself, and knew he faced another crisis, as grave and crucial as the first. He embraced the demon, full-hearted and with all his strength, and in that dreadful moment, became the demon. His slight splinters, a corner of his vision revealing the deceiver taking the hero's post at the altar, slight of stature compared with any Daikini, yet conveying the impression that he dwarfs them all, awaiting Elora more like a bridegroom than a celebrant, with no color whatsoever in his aura, as if he's been bleached of every human aspect, and a disturbing hunger to his eyes. At the very same moment, another aspect of the demon's awareness presents Thorn with a view of the rest of the crowded chamber, and the difference between what was and is becomes plain. Where Thorn, the Nelwyn, beheld men and women, recognizable shapes regardless of species, Thorn the demon perceives skirling filigrees of energy, patterns of life interwoven with those of power, great and small, some wholly self-contained, these mostly confined to the Daikini, while others burst forth to tangle with those around them. A common denominator binds them all, a fundamental faith in the light. Winding through the assemblage, however, are the delicate strands of the deceiver's glamour, a continuous thread reaching outward from where he stands, the spider at the heart of its web, awaiting a final fly. Thorn cast himself toward the doorway of Elora's great hall as the final fanfare sounded. He feels Anacre in the courtyard, pacing a foot because a horse, affected by the princess's apprehension as she is by Thorn's, can no longer stand to have her on its back. The hackles on Anacre's neck stand stiff as the bristles on a wire brush, the patterns of her being blazed hot with an anxiety neither logic nor action can quiet. Her focus is on the eastern horizon, already brightening with the approach of a full moon. When it rises fully into view, the rite of ascension will begin. Hands, not hands, slipped again, and Thorn hesitated, torn between two demands of equal weight. Elora's danger on the one hand, the demon's child on the other. The doors begin to open. He knows as certainly as he knows anything that Elora is doomed if she steps inside that chamber. He knows as well that the demon's child was doomed if he didn't act at once to complete the spell of resurrection. Silence within the hall, a greater silence on the streets without, as the entire populace seems to hold its collective breath. Silence far below, save for the hammering of Thorn's heart, beat after deliberate beat, as though some brute was urging the blood through his veins, as a shipmaster would galley slaves, by beating a mallet on the drum of his chest. It was no choice, really. He cleaved himself, child from demon, and then did the same again to cast the demon from himself. He bent over the woman's body, his lips to hers, and let his spirit pass over to all the hollow places within her. A final division, and with it, he loosed his grip on the child. Not so easy on the child's part. He felt it hold on as his own babies had, as any small thing would, desperate not to be cast aside from that which gave it life. "It's all right," he tried to say. "You're all right. You're safe." But the words wouldn't come, because for all his efforts, he wasn't yet sure they were true. Her lips moved beneath his, a hand of flesh lifted to echo the action of the spirit and take tight hold. There were tears in his eyes, tears in hers. "It's all right," he breathed, pulling away just enough to break the contact, their breaths still one. "You're all right. You're safe." And this time he believed it. "Well now, Peck, look who's been having himself a righteous good time." His mind told him how to react, but his body lacked the coordination to pull it off. He was still too much the demon, with no innate comprehension of the nature of flesh and bone and sinew, much less any sense of how to make them properly work. And so a swift turn became a stumbling collapse that left him sprawled on hands and knees. Worse, he'd given so much of himself that his weight alone was enough to set his arms immediately to trembling. He seemed to have forgotten how to breathe. He worked his lungs like a bellows, each inhalation and exhalation the result of a conscious command, desperate for air, only to find his best efforts reduced completely to naught, as spiked bands tightened on chest and brain. He heard aspirate bubbles from underneath his breastbone, and though he might be drowning, he couldn't lift his head to see the doorway, and then didn't have to, as a death dog, the Castellan's puppy, leapt from the top of the steps to send him tumbling head over heels. Two Myzan, one with crossbow tucked under arm, the other holding an axe already scored with blood. "The Castellan will be impressed, Peck," the Myzan continued. "Didn't think it was possible for any man or mage to beat a change spell. Mayhaps next time he'll use it on the princess, teaching Knackery to mind her place." A rough, appreciative laugh from his fellow, a sight he looked forward to. "Pity you won't be there to see it, wherever you are, little bit. You're too dangerous to live." He snapped his fingers and the death dog charged. Inhumanly fast as it was, the woman was that much faster, with strength to match as her arm swept round to catch the creature by its collar and hurl it at the entryway. The Myzan stumbled back through the door in a reflexive attempt to stay out of its way, and it struck the stone jamb with such force that all knew at once the beast was dead. The other lost his balance and pitched to the floor. Bad landing left him sprawled and bleeding, axe skittering to the woman as if she'd called it to her. She knew which end to hold it by, but that seemed about all she struggled. But that seemed to be about all as she struggled to her feet, body swaying with a constant series of minor adjustments as she tried to get used to standing on 2 feet, giving her the appearance of someone right off a boat after a long voyage. The Myzan grinned nastily as she recovered his feet and wiped his eyes clear, saber already in hand. He lunged. She fell away before his assault, axe coming up in a twisting motion that snagged the blade at midpoint and broke it from his hold. She swept around, always giving the impression of someone on the brink of a fatal loss of balance, casting the sword out of the Myzan's reach. She had him. He knew it. "No!" Thorn's cry was a surprise to them all, but mostly to the woman. She staggered, the smooth progression of her spin interrupted, and her foe took immediate advantage, bringing up his knee in a brutal blow to her midsection that doubled her over, following it up with a second kick to the face that bounced her on her back. Now he had the axe. Nothing came of it. Even as he raised the weapon, Thorn stabbed his knife at the man's side, aiming for the seam where the breast and back plate joined together. There was an armored guard flap underneath and mail below that. By rights, the blade should have glanced off, with no damage done. But Thorn did his own forging. He'd spent the best part of a year underground, apprenticed to the mountain folk, a branch of the Nelwyn tree that worked metals instead of soil, learning how to do it properly. This stiletto he cast thin as a knitting needle to fit between any seam and through the rings of a male shirt, and so it went to the hilt into the Myzan's side. Not a fatal strike, Thorn didn't have the proper angle for that, but enough to get the man's attention, which, in turn, caught the Nelwyn a powerful thump to the side of his skull, followed by a clumsy backswing of the axe. The flat of the blade like running full tilt into the door. Down he went, while the Myzan returned to what he decided was the preeminent threat, the woman. As he raised his axe to finish her, though, darkness exploded upward around him. He made no outcry. It was doubtful he even knew what was happening. One instant he was there, the next he wasn't. Only Thorn's knife lay on the floor to mark his passing. Thorn was still gawking when the woman's palm slapped his chest and knocked him aside. The sound of her hand merging with the swish of the other, Myzan's crossbow bolt as it whizzed by. He was in the doorway, using the jamb for cover as he worked the cocking lever to recharge his bow. The archer had as clear a field of fire as any archer could wish for, and from the speed and evident efficiency of his reload, it was doubtful either Thorn or the woman would survive a rush up the stairs. The Myzan raised his bow, and his head separated from the rest of him. Body and bow fell together in a scarlet mess. Where he'd been stood Garin Havelhand, double-handed, broadswords shaking in his grasp. His leathers were torn, his face scored with grime and gore, soaked as much with blood as sweat. "Bastard!" he cried, and then, with face upturned as though to the whole palace above, "Bastards!" He spied the death dog and, as though to emphasize the point, hacked at it like a logger with his blade until both stone and steel were badly chipped. He was too caught up in his frenzy to notice a pool of darkness oozing up beneath the hound. After his last stroke, when he'd exhausted himself too much to go on, the creature simply vanished, along with the remains of the other Myzan. Thorn felt a faint taste of the demon's satisfaction at its meal. It made him sick, but also made him hunger for more. "They're killing the lions," Garin said hoarsely, tripping over his own feet as he made his way down the stairs, using the wall as a bulwark to hold himself erect. "Cut 'em down like butchers, them and their damn birds." "The herons?" "Drumheller, what's happening? What does it mean?" "Nothing good, I fear. Has anyone sounded the alarm?" "Not left of ours to try. Only reason I'm still alive is I followed these gobshite yabos into the old keep. Forgive me, Peck. I didn't know this is what they did with you. I thought they'd treat you better." "Could have been worse, Pathfinder. Are you hurt?" "Bumped and bruised, but not enough to matter. Not done well by this, though." He branched his blade, frowning at the scars he'd left along the edge. "Done me fair service, it has. Deserved better in return. Make amends as and when you can, lad. Now's not the time. See the lady here." The young Daikini squinted for a better look in the dim glow cast by the fallen torches, and then flushed to the roots of his hair. "Blessed Elora!" he squeaked. "She's got no clothes!" "Then find her some," Thorn told him briskly, "and quickly. Horses, too, by the carter's gate." Aren't you coming with?" "I have other responsibilities."
"How long do we wait, then?"
"As long as moonrises seems prudent. I wish I could be more specific, but in truth, Garin, I've no idea. Just remember to err on the side of caution."
"We can't come with you?"
"Where I'm going, and what I'm going to do, it's best I'm alone. Trust me in this, and be careful."
"And you the same. Get yourself a name, missy?"
Thorn hadn't expected a reply, but then he also hadn't expected any skill at arms. "Corey," He'd heard and turned to stare in dumbfounded astonishment. Her voice was deep, a husky contralto, roughened by an age of unuse, made more awkward by the necessity to resort to physical speech where demons normally cast their thoughts directly from mind to mind. She knew what she wanted to say, that much was clear. She was finding it difficult shaping lips and larynx to form the words. Cordy, Banafin. Geralt Havilhand, a pleasure. Stay, she said haltingly to Thorn, as though finding the proper word to use was as much a challenge as the actual speech. You! No, Thorn replied despairingly. He kept his construction direct and clear, the way he would with a child. Stay with him! He indicated Garen and struck a tone and manner that permitted no opposition. There was a moment when he thought she'd argue, a set to the jaw, a glint to the eye, that bespoke of a will as stubbornly indomitable as his own. But this once, she let it pass and did as she was told. The two soldiers left. And that is all the time I have today to read Shadow of the Moon. To read Shadow Moon by Chris Claremont and George Lucas. Thank you for spending part of your day with me. If you enjoyed this reading, please like, share, and subscribe for more Willow content. You can also support the channel by becoming a patron on Patreon or a member here on YouTube. Your support helps us keep the magic alive. Thank you to my developer patron Chris Androu as well. So, until the Infernal Brotherhood convenes again, my fellow scruffy-looking nerf herders, may the Force be with you.